Okay, I have read the story Brave New World, written by Aldous Huxley, a British author, English author who died in 1963. And this book, Brave New World, was definitely one of his best selling novels and was later turned into a movie in 1980, I believe. The book takes place in central London Hatchery and Conditioning Center, which is this sort of center where they produce embryoes. It's sort of a factory, I guess. They produce these babies and, well, humans, and put them in these different social classes where we have alphas, who is like the highest rank of the social classes. They're the ones who are allowed to think and allowed to consider things, and they're sort of the born leaders, whereas we have the betas, the gammas, the deltas, and the epsilons, and the epsilons are just the rock bottom of the social classes. We follow an alpha named Bernard Marx, who is a bit of an abnormal alpha compared to the others. He thinks a bit differently, he looks a bit differently, but I'm gonna continue on that later. And Bernard finds this former beta in a savage reservation called Linda, who got pregnant with a baby called John, who is now a grown up, and he brings these two to the civilized world, where John becomes this sort of sensation because he's a savage, and he's the director's son as well. The director is his father. So he becomes a very sensational person. But when Linda dies, John's mother, John goes a bit mad, and he destroys a lot of soma, which is sort of a drug for the civilized people. They take to be happy and to be in control, and just to, it's kind of the source to their very well functioned society. So John moves out to a lighthouse to be for himself and to not be in this society. But he gets discovered, I guess, by some locals, and the story ends up with John hanging himself. So we have Bernard Marx, who is one of the main characters, and he's an alpha, but he doesn't really fit in as an alpha. He fails to fit in. Not only size-wise, he's a bit smaller than the usual alphas, so he doesn't really look like the typical leader, but also the way he thinks. I think it's hard for him because he lives in this very perfect world where there's no flaws, and there's like no room for development or changes, because why would you change a world that is already perfect? So I guess he's a bit insecure for that reason, and he also has a different vision of a lot of things. He has a different vision of women and just relationship in general. They have a slogan, I guess, called "Everyone belongs to everyone else" when it comes to relationships. So they don't just have one partner; they share each other, and they try each other, as they call it, which Bernard is not fond of. He falls in love with a woman named Lenina, and he wants to take her on a date to make her fall in love with him. And I found a place in the book where they are actually talking about Lenina, some of the other guys, and Bernard hears this. So it goes, "Oh, she's a splendid girl, wonderfully punitic. I'm surprised you haven't had her." "I can't think how it is I haven't," said the assistant predestinator. "I certainly will, at the first opportunity." From his place on the opposite side of the changing room aisle, Bernard Marx overheard what they were saying and turned pale. So Bernard is not agreeing on this way to talk about women, but the women is also referring to the men the same way, as sort of an object they haven't used, or like, you should really try this. Like, they're advising each other to try each other. I also believe Bernard goes through some sort of development in the story. He starts off as being quite not emotional, but you kind of sympathize with him because he's a bit different, and because he feels like doing something else that the other are not doing. He's kind of standing out from the alpha typical type. So you kind of sympathize with him, but later on, as John Savage comes into the picture, I believe he changes a little bit. For example, when he is hosting this gathering with for a few of his friends, he wants them to show John to them, like show what he accomplished, and John doesn't show up, and he becomes really angry, and they start kind of having a fight, and he just seems like a very like not the same person as he does in the beginning. The other main character is John Savage, and he is the only person we meet in the story who has not grown up as a civilized person. He has a mother and he has a father. He comes into the civilized world and he's very different from all the other types. He does not know the rules, he does not know how to act or how to talk to other people, and he instantly falls in love with Lenina when he sees her, which is a very abnormal thing. It's very shameful to be in love, to have a family, or just to be with the same person um, a number of times. It's very abnormal and it's very unacceptable. So Lenina does catch up on what he's feeling and she does get the signals, but because it's so unknown to her as well, they don't really seem to find a way to make it work. They misunderstand each other a lot, I think. Lenina talks to her friend Fanny about it at one point, and Fanny asks, but doesn't he like you? Asks Fanny, and she answers, sometimes I think he does, and sometimes I think he doesn't. He always does his best to avoid me. Goes out of the room when I come in, won't touch me, won't even look at me. But sometimes, if I turn around suddenly, I catch him staring, and then, well, you know how men look when they like you. So there's definitely something between these two, but because they live in a world where this is not acceptable and where it's not a possibility, they can't really figure it out, and there's no way for them to be together because it would not be looked at very well. And in the end, their relationship ends up very tragically because John decides that he is unable to fit into the society. He's so different from what the norms and the rules they have. So he moves out to this lighthouse where he can just be himself and be the normal person he used to be. And this happens after his mother dies, where he gets sort of a mental breakdown, or he becomes a little mad. But because he's such a sensation in this civilized world, some of the locals finds him in the lighthouse, and they start to visit him and wants to talk to him. And in the end, there's a lot of locals who wants to be in contact with him, but it's too much for him, and in the end he hangs himself. The factory they're living and working at is a very huge place, I think. 34 stories, and when you walk into the place, they have the slogan, which is community, identity, and stability, which is the thing they're living for. They describe it as sort of a huge factory, I think, where they're producing these embryos. We have different rooms. We have the fertilizing rooms, and we have bottling rooms, and it's just divided in a very different sections. So it seems like a big factory, and you get this kind of laboratory vibe, I think, and maybe like a hospital or something. So it doesn't seem like a nice place to live or a nice place to spend all your time at, because they're very little like real life, because they're so against normal human birth. They think it's sort of disgusting, and at one point they actually compare human birth to animal birth and becomes all frightened and like feel nauseous about the fact that a human can give birth to a child. The savage world is very different from the factory or the civilized world, I guess. It's described as a more nature kind of world, as a more humane world. There are actually animals, there are dirt, it has some sort of smell, there are more life, there are these Indians, and as Lenina and Bernard visits the place, she actually says, "The dirt to start with, the piles of rubbish, the dust, the dogs, the flies." Her face wrinkled up into a grimace of disgust. She held her handkerchief to her nose. "But how can they live like this?" she broke out in a voice indignant incredulity. So they're very surprised that people actually live in dirt and with other animals. It actually smells like the people who live there, and she cannot understand it because she sees this as such an abnormal thing, and it almost like inhumane for her. So it also shows how controlled and how not like non-cultural and non-loving of the landscape and nature these people are trained to be. The story is very dystopia. It's a futuristic story that sort of shows how the world would be in the future if there were no pain, I guess, if there were no sorrow, if there were no faults, if everyone would just be happy with the thing they have and they think they got. Like, if they were forced to be happy and have this eternal happiness, how the world would end up like. And it doesn't seem like a very fun life, I guess. The high class, like the alphas and the betas, seem to have a very alike life, I guess. They don't do much because there's no place for development because the world is so perfect, so they can't even develop new ideas or new changes, and they pretty much do the same every day. And the highlight of their life, or the most important things of their life, is to find a new partner to be with. So it seems very boring and very alike to each other. The title of the book, Brave New World, comes from Shakespeare's The Tempest, which is a speech from Miranda to Shakespeare where she is isolated on an island and she sees some sort of human activity, but it is like the bad side of the human activity. And it's pretty much the same with John Savage, as he also refers to the civilized world as a new world. And John uses a lot of Shakespeare references throughout the story, so this is just one out of very many Shakespeare references.